The reading this morning will be from Genesis chapter 50, verses 15 through 21. Genesis 50, 15 through 21. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong which we did to him?" So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father charged before he died, saying, 'Thus you shall say to Joseph, Please forgive, I beg you, the transgressions of your brothers and their sin, for they did you wrong. And now, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father.' And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, 'Behold, we are your servants.' But Joseph said to them, 'Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. So therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones.' So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them."
Thank you, Maury. If you haven't already, I hope you'll take your Bible and open to that passage in Genesis chapter 50 as we talk about Joseph, and especially this wonderful quality of God in his providence, the providence of Almighty God. And don't you just love it when Monty makes a mistake because he's so perfect all the time? Don't you just love that? Someone that can get up, preach a great sermon, and teach a great class, and do such a great job leading, singing. He's a wonderful dad and husband. He is not, artificial intelligence, as some people believe. He's not IA or AI. Anyway, I'm glad. I tell you what, I miss y'all. By the way, I was gone, and I was in Florida last week and preaching a gospel meeting, and it was a good meeting and met so many nice people, but man, I miss my home congregation. I miss my friends and family, and I'm glad to be back, and I'm glad you're here. We got a lot of visitors with us today. We're so thankful that you're here, and we appreciate you so much. I know there's going to be a little bit said about this in just a little bit, but today is our fall festival. We have this once a year. It's kind of a big deal. We go outside, which, by the way, according to the weather folks, today is going to be one of the most beautiful days of the year. At 5 o'clock, it's going to be around 71 and sunny. And so we're going to have a lot of festivities outside from about 3:30 and on. And I think we're going to have a little bit, just a real abbreviated worship service outside this evening and about 5 o'clock. And a lot of folks have worked hard to put this together. And it's just a lot of fun for the kids and the family. And you come. I'm not going to wear a suit tonight, okay? I'm going to wear my jeans and my, and a tie. But no. So I have never bought anything on eBay, but I've gone on it and I've looked. I've never sold anything, but I know there's some people in this congregation that are champions on eBay. They have sold, they have bought. There are millions of transactions made on eBay, and there's actually people that have kept track over the years of unusual things that have been sold on eBay. A few years back, someone sold a grilled sandwich on eBay, and I don't know if you know this, but they said it had the face of the Virgin Mary on the sandwich. The little sandwich had magical power since it was unaffected by mold for over 10 years. You laugh at that. It sold for $28,000. There was a haunted rubber duck that was sold on eBay a few years back. It was supposedly had the power to possess children. Why would you ever sell anything like that, or why would you ever buy anything like that? We laugh at that. It sold for $107,000, a haunted duck on eBay. My favorite, though, was a little girl in London, 10 years old, that tried to sell her grandmother on eBay. She said, and I quote in the ad, she said, "My grandmother is annoying but cuddly, and tried to sell her. Of course, eBay has laws against human trafficking, and she had to take that down. But maybe the strangest was a decade ago, one of the most bizarre, a man on eBay that offered his life up for sale. And he said, and I quote, "My name is Ian Usher. I've had enough of my life. I don't want it anymore. You can have it if you like. Whatever it is, it's going up for sale in one big auction. Everything I have and everything that I am. On the day that it's sold and settled, I intended to walk out the front door with my wallet in one pocket and the passport in the other. And I'll get on a train, and I have no idea where I am going or what the future holds for me." Ian sold, by the way, his home, some beat-up furniture, and an old car and a little motorcycle for $305,000 on eBay. But in that text, he said that his wife had left him 6 years ago and divorced him, and he wanted to remove all reminders of his life with his ex-wife, and later he would move to Australia. There's a lot of ways to deal with rejection, and this has to take the cake. I think that you want to sell your life, you can have it, all of it. But if there's anybody in the Bible, I think maybe the one person that could have wanted to sell his life for all the bad things that happened to him, it's the man named Joseph. Joseph was hated by his brothers. He was sold to the Midianites. Potiphar jailed him. His cellmates forgot about him. But if you know the story of Joseph, the end, and we're reading and studying this today, God promoted him. It is an incredible story, and you say, how do you know this story is so important, and why should we study the story? I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but Genesis only has 50 chapters, right? The story of Joseph starts at chapter 37 and ends in chapter 50, which means that 1/4 of the book of Genesis is taken up with the story of Joseph. For some reason, God wanted us to hear the story of Joseph, and certainly in the few minutes we have this morning, I won't be able to tell the whole entire story of Joseph. You need to read it on your own if you don't know it. It is one of the most incredible stories in all of the Bible. The story introduces us to what I believe is one of the most notable traits of God, and that is, as I've already said, God's providence, His providential care in our life. A miracle is when God intervenes in natural law, but providence is when God cooperates with natural law to bring about a supernatural result. In providence, God somewhat manipulates or uses ordinary events to bring about an extraordinary outcome. There's something else, and I can't move on without saying this, but there's something else that I've always appreciated about the life of Joseph, and that is that Joseph, I think, proves to all of us that no matter how hard you had it growing up, no matter how bad you were ever mistreated or mishandled or misjudged growing up, you can always change your life. You can live well now, and I think Joseph shows that. It's an amazing story. Joseph's background, by the way, a couple of months ago I did a sermon called The Dysfunctional Family, and I actually used Jacob as an example, and his family is an example of a dysfunctional family. If you know the story of Jacob, and I won't go back and repeat that, it's a weird, strange story. But Jacob and Joseph's 11 brothers are, to say the least, extremely dysfunctional. His dad had 4 wives, and I don't mean in a row, I mean all at one time. His brothers get involved in all sorts of sordid things, rape and murder, and even with Joseph, human trafficking. We know that in chapter 50, it's kind of a crescendo. It is all of the things that start in Genesis 37, they come to a head, they come to an end, and it's a great end in chapter 50. And what starts out in this text as fear ends in forgiveness. And I love the story of Joseph and his heart. I've learned over the years of studying the Bible and reading the story of Joseph, I've learned a lot about my life, and I've learned God has used the life, I believe, of Joseph to help change me. And so I've entitled this lesson, When Bad Things Happen, But God. It was found in the text, by the way. Bad things happen to Joseph, and bad things will happen to you. But there is another side of that story, and that is how God uses those things to help us, to grow us, to make us who He wants us to be. Joseph's brothers were afraid. That's what this text tells us in verse 15 of Genesis 50, that this falls after their daddy dies. By the way, Jacob is now dead. They have taken him back to Canaan, by the way, and they have buried him in a particular place where his ancestors have been buried. And Jacob is gone, and now that he's out of the way, his brothers, they come back to Egypt, and they begin to have this discussion between themselves that somehow now the filter between death and the death of Joseph and them, and death in life, was their father, and he's been taken out of the way. And they began to have this conversation. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father, this is Jacob, was dead, perhaps Joseph, they said, will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil that we did to him. That's guilt speaking, by the way. They sold Joseph. They were jealous of Joseph. If you know the story, his little coat of many colors and his dreaming and being daddy's favorite, they were jealous of them. And by the way, do you realize how much time has gone by between Genesis 37 and Genesis 50? 40 years. 4 decades have come and gone, and still it's in their minds. Can I tell you what happens to us? Guilt. Guilt messes us up. Sometimes when we carry all this baggage around with us, we project it on other people. Joseph loved them. They said, oh, he hates us. He's going to kill us. He's blessed them. What happens is when you have a guilty conscience and you carry around all this garbage, you begin to project it. You begin to throw that on other people, even though it has absolutely nothing to do with them. In one sense, this is a fairy tale ending. Their brother saves their life. Their brother is second only to Pharaoh. He is the most powerful man, and by the way, all of the world, the most powerful nation at that time would have been Egypt, and the greatest economy, thanks to God helping Joseph, the greatest economy at the time would have been run by Joseph. So in one sense, it's a fairy tale ending for the boys who have sold their brother and get him back, and now he's taking care of them. On the other side of that, it's a frightful thing that the guy that you sold threw into a pit and you thought was dead is not actually dead, but he is large and in charge, and he is second only to Pharaoh, and with one word, with one motion, he could have all of them killed. And so they feared. In fact, they said they hate us. By the way, that word, it's interesting. That word means that he may bear a grudge. That's what happens to people that bear a grudge. Does he keep it inside of him? For 50 years, for 40 years, this has been going on. Now, he's been harboring this grudge, and it's getting greater and greater and greater. That's what it means. This resentment and bitterness has built up, and now because he hates us, he's going to repay the evil that we did to him. And so he's going to give full vent to the hatred that they believe that he has. Psalm 38 and verse 4 says, my guilt has overwhelmed me like a burden too heavy to bear. Spurgeon one time said, I'd rather bear any affliction than the burden of a guilty conscience. All they were doing is projecting their own personality on their brother. It was them that sold him. It was them that thought he was dead. It was them that thought they had killed their brother. All of that stuff, even after 40 years, was still around. And they projected on Joseph, and he is, instead of unforgiving and unrelenting, is kind and forgiving to his brothers. They fabricate a story, and the reason I believe it's fabricated, remember the story that was just read, Maury read to you, is they tell Joseph, hey, before Dad died, he said, you're going to take care of us. Well, I don't want you to do this now, but in Genesis chapter 49, if you just went back to a chapter and you read that chapter, what you realize is Jacob calls all of his sons in, including Joseph. He has all 12 around him, and he speaks to them. And if he was going to say any, by the way, he is unafraid to say what they've done wrong and what their future is, and he speaks to them. And probably if he was going to say that, he either would have said it to Joseph privately or he would have said it to them publicly. But the brothers say, well, Dad, said, you need to take care of us right before he died. It's always good, by the way, to use a dead person as a scapegoat, because you can't go back and ask them questions, and that's exactly what they do to their father. They use him as a fall guy so that they could be protected by their dad's false words. This is not true. In fact, I want to do this. It won't take long, but just if you turn your Bible with me to Genesis 45. In Genesis 45, 5 chapters earlier, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. And this is what he says, and Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. This is verse 1 of Genesis 45, by the way. So there was no man with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. I'm going to drop down to verse 5. And now this is Joseph speaking, now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land for 2 years, and there have been 5 years in which there's neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you. You notice what he's saying is God had a hand in this. God sent me before you to preserve you a remnant in the earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now therefore, it is not you who sent me here, but God. You ought to go through, by the way, and just underline the number of times that Joseph says, but God, and it was he who made me the father to Pharaoh and Lord over all of this household, the ruler over all the land of Egypt. You meant it for evil, but God, he intended something else in all of this. And so he has already forgiven his brothers. And by the way, it's kind of an unusual way of looking at life. Proverbs 29 and verse 25 says, the fear of man brings a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord shall be safe. On one side, you've got his brothers. The fear of man becomes a snare. But on the other side, you have Joseph, and that is whoever trusts in the Lord shall be safe. The third thing I want to show you is that Joseph forgives his brothers. You know that if you know anything about the story. Joseph, in fact, weeps. I don't think he's weeping because he's sad. I think he's weeping because he sees the torment of his brothers. And Joseph wept and he spoke to them. Verse 19, and Joseph said to them, do not be afraid. All the way back in chapter 45, they were afraid when they find out their brother is still alive. All these years later, he's kept them safe and he's protected them and fed them. And Joseph has to say to them again, do not be afraid, for I am in the place of God, and you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about, as it is to this day, to save many people alive. So in closing here, there are three things that I want to say is the theology of Joseph that should be our theology. Number one is God is in charge. Not politicians. God is in charge. It was Daniel that said to Nebuchadnezzar, it was God that put you on the throne, and he's going to take you off the throne, and the only reason you're in power is because God wanted you here, and if he doesn't want you here, then he's going to take you away. God is in charge. By the way, Joseph, who's second only to Pharaoh, did not say, I am in charge. That's the problem with so many of our lives, is we think we're in charge. We're not in charge of anything. God is in charge, and he needs to be the Lord of our life. And Daniel and Joseph, as well as you and I, need to learn this, I think, a very basic lesson, that God has been, he always will be in charge. In Romans 13, Paul said, let every soul, that is, every soul living, let every soul be subject to governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. So God is in charge. He's moving people. Joseph says, I'm in the place of God. I'm the prime minister of Egypt. I'm not God, but I am the prime minister of Egypt. And the only reason that I am here is because God wanted me here and he put me here. And I trust him with my life. The second thing I want to remind you of is that God uses bad things to bring about good results. This is a tough one for me, and I'll be honest with you. I'm still working on this in my life, and I may not see some of those things now, and I think, you know, how 2020 sometimes is, hindsight is 2020, but I really have seen, though, and I believe with all of my heart that God, he may allow a bad thing, he doesn't may cause a bad thing, but certainly in the life of Joseph, he takes all of these bad things and he creates this incredible ending to the story. Be careful about what you call bad, because God can take even a bad thing. And I'm not saying be happy for a bad thing. I'm saying that God can take even a bad thing and use it to bring about his will and goodness into our life. I heard about, boy, I meet all kinds of, you think there are characters in Georgia, y'all ought to just go to Florida every once in a while and visit. There are some real characters in Florida. And one of the things we did for this hot dog luncheon one of the things we did for this gospel meeting, I didn't go down for a week of hot dog luncheons, but we did on Saturday, before the meeting started, we had the church through this hot dog luncheon. Never seen anything like it, but basically they gave away hot dogs for a couple hours in the afternoon. And they had people stand out by the road, and this is a small congregation of about 70 or 80 people, and these are mostly older folks, but they had a few teenagers come stand out by the road, older folks standing by the road. They cooked these hot dogs, and they said, free hot dogs, come and get it for lunch. I thought, I don't know how that's going to work. I don't know what would happen if we put free hot dogs out here by our road, and I'm serious about this. But y'all, 58 people in just a short amount of time rolled in that parking lot, started eating hot dogs. And man, every one of them in fact, this one woman was driving a little child's motorcycle, a pink child's motorcycle. And she had, I'm not making this up, there's no helmet law in Florida. And she had a pink motorcycle that was electronically run, and she had her teenage daughters on the front and the back of it. It was the three of them that rolled into the parking lot for a hot dog luncheon. And Kay sat down, was being so sweet to him and said, hey, tomorrow, when you come and, I want you, you bring your car, just park it over there. And she goes, I don't have a car. This is my car. And Kay went, oh man, normally I'm the one that changed feet, But we sat down and started talking to a guy, and you talking about passionate. He was a bullfighter from Spain. I told Moise about this. I needed Moise to help talk to this man. But he was so passionate about everything. But he told me about a dog that attacked him. In every story he told me, it ended, I killed the dog with a stick. Everything was killed with a stick. And he ate hot dog. His wife was injured in an accident, and she was blind in one eye, could not speak, and he said, we've been having a rough time. We're coming back from Lowe's. We just stopped to eat hot dogs and kind of like adios. But about halfway through my sermon on Sunday morning, the old ex-bullfighter came in and sat down with his wife. And they stayed and ate, and man, she put away some more groceries the next day. And he said, I don't know why I came back. I don't know why I like you. That's what he said. I said, people don't know why they like me. It's true in Georgia. But I said, DePolo, I think God put us together for a reason. I think he put you in my path. I think your wife wanted to eat hot dogs yesterday so that we could talk today about the Bible. I don't think this is a big mistake. I don't think this is by happenstance or chance. I think that God, he could be working all of this out. The Bible tells us that, by the way, over and over about God's desire to work out those things in our life. And you know this verse. It's Romans 8:28. Paul said, and we know, he didn't say we think, we hope, we keep our fingers crossed. We know that all things, not some things, we know that all things work together for good to those that love God, to those that are called according to his purpose. The Yaskos were in an accident a couple of weeks ago, and thank goodness they weren't injured. They were scratched up. I said, hey, did your airbags deploy? He said, every airbag we had went off. And I said, what do you think about all of it? He said, I keep saying all things work together for good to those that love God, those that are called according to his purpose. Be careful about what we say. I tell you the Florida story because in Florida, I was told about a man who was recently in a motorcycle accident, and because of his neck injury, they had to do some x-rays and an MRI on him, and they found a nodule in his throat, and it was the beginning of cancer. And what he thought was so horrible in this motorcycle accident actually ended up to be an x-ray or an MRI that would save his life. I'm not saying that we ought to be happy about bad things, y'all. I'm saying be careful about what you say is bad, losing a job or having to move, because I believe God can take all of that and he can use it to his glory. And finally, God uses people to help other people. You realize in the story of Joseph that there's something greater working here than Joseph being, by the way, second only to Pharaoh in saving the people of Egypt and a few people. Because what starts out to be 70 people, Joseph somehow knew that he was there to preserve life. If you know the story, 400 years would go by before Moses would come and rescue, remember, the people that had gone because of a famine to Egypt. They weren't 70 people. They were 2 million people strong that Moses leads to the promised land. And guess who the tribes of Israel are? They are the brothers of Joseph. God has preserved not only them, but their families and their future so that he could create a nation that would bring glory to him. It's a story, by the way, of forgiveness and being gracious, and don't ever waste your suffering. Don't ever waste your heartache. I think that's what Paul's saying in 2 Corinthians 1, that he comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort other people. I close with an article I ran across. It was a psychologist from New York, and he's attached to a prominent university, and he said, and I'm just going to read, he said, and I quote, imagine that you have a child, and for 5 minutes you're given a script of what that child's life would be like. You could have an eraser and you could edit his life. You could take out whatever you want. You read that your child will be having a learning disability in grade school. Reading, which comes easy for some kids, will become laborious for years. In high school, your child will make a great circle of friends, and one of them will die of cancer. After high school, this child will actually get into a college they wanted to attend, but while they're in a car crash, and your child will lose a leg and go through a difficult depression. A few years later, your child would get a great job and would find the woman of his dreams and get married, but then go through a brief moment of separation and then have an incredible life. He says, you have an eraser. What would you erase in that child's life? Now, before you answer that, if I were to show you the life of Joseph and all of his heartache, what would you erase out of Joseph's life? Because if you were to erase the bad stuff, you would be erasing the good stuff. If you were to erase him being disenfranchised by his brothers, sold, lied about, you think of all the things that Joseph went, if you were to, and I would, and boy, I tell you what, if you took and we are such protectors, we would want any bad stuff to come in to our child's life. This is what he wrote, by the way. I laughed out loud about this. I'm part of a generation of adults called the helicopter parents, because we're constantly trying to swoop in to our kids' educational life, relational life, sports life, etc., to make sure that no one is mistreating them, no one is disappointing them. We want them to experience one unobstructed success after another. And then he wrote, one Halloween, a mom came to our door to trick or treat. Why she didn't send her kids? Well, the weather was bad, and she said that she was driving them from house to house, and they fell asleep in the van, and she didn't want to wake them up, so she was walking up to the door trick-or-treating for them. He said, I wanted to say to her, why don't you eat the candy for them and get a stomachache for them too? Then they can be completely protected. If you could have a magic wand, if you could erase every failure, every setback, suffering and pain, are you sure that would be a good idea? So one question is, the God that we claim we serve, the God that we claim we trust, the God that we claim we're committed to, do you believe he's big enough, that he is strong enough, that he's powerful enough, even to take the bad things that have happened to you and make them what he wants them to be? I can't help but to tell this story, okay, but Vanessa Machado, sitting in the audience, she told us a couple of years ago, she's a cancer survivor. She told Kay and I a couple of years ago that the doctor that helped her get through this cancer, she really loved, but because of some situations, her insurance changed. And she was angry that, you know, the insurance changed. She had to find another doctor. And this other doctor was nice, but he had never met her before, and he was looking at her and examining, and right before he kind of left the room, he said, Vanessa, you realize that one of your arms are larger than the other? And she said, I didn't know that. She said, my doctor's never noticed that. And Vanessa said, my doctor had seen me all these years, was used to that. He would have never said that, but because that doctor saw it, I think it was blood clots that were in her arm. That doctor, because of a change of insurance that led to a new doctor that would have noticed something that maybe her doctor wouldn't have noticed, she said what I thought was a bad thing actually turned out to be a good thing. I love Joseph. I love Joseph because he is the guy that didn't ask for any of that stuff to happen. All he did was just trust God and stay at it, day in and day out. And I want to tell you, I think I'm talking to some people this morning that may have some bad things going on in their life, maybe some difficult things, and you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. You can't see to the end. But I believe God can. I believe he can see what we cannot see. I believe he knows things that we do not know, but he asks us to trust him, to put our life into his hands. We're going to sing this morning, Have Thine Own Way, Lord. What a great song for us to sing at the end of a lesson like this. And certainly it's the Lord we want to have, to make the Lord of our life and to have preeminent in our life. That even right now, going through a difficult time in our life, we could say, Lord, have your way with me. I want to do your will in my life. And maybe this morning, some of you have been brought to this place, not by accident, but to hear again someone plead with you to become a New Testament Christian, that you might become a child of God, that you might hear, that is, hear the Word of God and confess, that you might actually say that I believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. Be willing to be baptized into Christ, as it says in Romans 6, that you will be raised in a brand new life, that even this morning God brought you to this place to take care of the most important thing. And if you have already, I want to tell you, trust God that he is working in your life. He will not fail you. He has your best interest at heart. And one day, maybe not tomorrow or next week, I believe one day when we've traveled the last mile, we'll be able to look back and see God's hand working in our life all the way through. Trust him. I'll be here at the front, and Elder will be with me. We can help you in any way.